The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds at Fort Bragg as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted her tactical vest for the third time. At 26, she had learned to make herself smaller, quieter, less threatening to the men who surrounded her in the Special Forces selection course. It wasn't weakness, it was strategy. "Mitchell, you good to go?" Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez called out, his Texas drawl cutting through the humid North Carolina air. At 32, Rodriguez was the unofficial leader of their training group, a man who had seen 3 deployments and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had earned his place through blood and sacrifice. "Ready, Sergeant," Sarah replied with a smile that had become her trademark, pleasant, non-threatening, the kind of expression that made men want to protect rather than compete with her. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. In the 6 months since Sarah had joined their advanced training group, he had developed a protective instinct toward her that he didn't fully understand. She was competent, sure, but she had a gentleness that seemed out of place in the brutal world of Special Forces training. "Remember, we're doing close-quarters combat today," said Sergeant Jake Williams, a lean man from rural Montana who had been Sarah's most consistent guardian during training exercises. "Stay behind us when we breach. Let us handle the heavy contact." Sarah nodded dutifully, though something flickered behind her eyes that none of the men noticed. "Of course, Jake, whatever you think is best." The truth was more complex than any of them realized. Sarah Mitchell had graduated first in her class from West Point, not second or third, but first. She had scored perfect marks in every combat simulation, had broken academy records in hand-to-hand combat, and had requested Special Forces assignment against the advice of every superior who thought she should pursue a safer military career. But she had learned early that excellence came with a price for women in the military. Outstanding performance threatened male egos, created resentment, and ultimately made her less effective as a team member. So she had made a conscious choice to dim her light, to be good enough to belong but not so good that she stood out. The strategy had worked. Her male teammates accepted her, protected her, and included her in their tight-knit brotherhood. They never questioned her capabilities because she never gave them reason to feel threatened. She was Sarah, the nice girl who tried hard and needed their guidance. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been studying them as much as they had been training together. She knew Rodriguez's tendency to favor his dominant right hand in close combat. She knew William's blind spot when approaching from his left side. She knew Corporal David Chen's habit of overthinking tactical decisions under pressure. She knew all of this because she had been trained to observe, to analyze, and to exploit weaknesses. But she had never used that training against her teammates, because she needed their acceptance more than she needed their recognition. As the team moved toward the training facility, Sarah caught her reflection in the window of the operations building. The woman staring back looked soft, approachable, unthreatening. It was a carefully constructed image that had taken months to perfect. But underneath the pleasant exterior, Sarah Mitchell was something else entirely. She was a weapon that had been forged in the fires of the world's most demanding military academy, sharpened by years of advanced tactical training and tempered by the discipline of someone who had learned to hide her true nature. Today, for the first time in 6 months, that weapon was about to be revealed. The briefing room at Fort Bragg's Special Operations Training Center buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that preceded significant events. 12 Special Forces candidates sat in metal chairs, their attention focused on Major Patricia Hayes, the officer who supervised their advanced training program. "Ladies and gentlemen," Major Hayes began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned her position through exceptional performance in a male-dominated field. "Today marks a special evaluation in your training program." Sarah sat in the back row, as had become her habit. She noticed Rodriguez and Williams exchange glances, the kind of look that said they were ready for whatever challenge was coming. Chen was already taking notes, his methodical approach to everything evident in his posture. "General Robert Thompson will be conducting your evaluation today," Major Hayes continued, and the room fell into complete silence. Every person in that room knew who General Thompson was. 3 decades of special operations experience, Navy SEAL, Rangers, Delta Force. He was the kind of soldier who existed in legends, the standard against which all other Special Forces operators measured themselves. "Holy shit," Williams whispered under his breath. "Thompson's here," Rodriguez asked, his voice tight with excitement and nervousness. Sarah felt something stir inside her chest, a feeling she had been suppressing for 6 months. It wasn't nervousness, it was anticipation. General Thompson represented everything she had been trained to become, everything she had been hiding. "The evaluation will consist of 3 phases, Major Hayes explained. Combat simulation, tactical problem solving, and leadership assessment. General Thompson will be observing each of you individually and making recommendations for your continued placement in the program." The implications were clear. This wasn't just an evaluation, It was a test that would determine their entire military futures. Some would advance to the most elite units in the American military, others would be reassigned to conventional forces. "Mitchell," Rodriguez said quietly as they filed out of the briefing room, "stick close to us during the exercises. Thompson's going to be looking for any weakness, and we don't want you to get overwhelmed." Sarah nodded with her characteristic pleasant smile. "Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you looking out for me." But as she walked toward the training facility, Sarah was thinking about General Thompson's reputation. He was known for his ability to see through facades, to identify potential that others missed. He had built his career on finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, the exceptional in the overlooked. For the first time in 6 months, Sarah wondered if her strategy of hiding her capabilities had been a mistake. General Thompson wasn't going to be impressed by someone who played it safe. He was going to be looking for warriors. The question was, after 6 months of pretending to be something she wasn't, could she remember how to be who she really was? The combat simulation facility at Fort Bragg was a labyrinth of concrete walls, steel doors, and simulated urban environments designed to test every aspect of Special Forces training. As the candidates suited up in full tactical gear, Sarah could feel the weight of expectation settling over the group. General Thompson stood at the observation platform, a man in his 50s whose presence commanded attention without effort. He was smaller than Sarah had expected, but there was something in his bearing that suggested coiled power, like a weapon at rest. "First exercise," announced the training instructor, "close quarters combat simulation. You'll be working in teams of 4, clearing a building occupied by hostile forces, paintball rounds, full contact authorized." Sarah's team consisted of herself, Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen. As they approached the building entrance, Rodriguez automatically took point, with Williams covering the rear. Chen positioned himself for tactical support, and Sarah found herself relegated to the safest position in the formation. "Remember," Rodriguez whispered as they prepared to breach, "Sarah stays in the middle. We handle the contacts." Sarah nodded, but something inside her was beginning to rebel against the familiar pattern. She could see tactical opportunities that her teammates were missing, angles of approach that would be more effective, positioning that would give them better control of the engagement. The door burst open, and they moved into the building. Rodriguez led the way, his movements competent but predictable. Williams covered the corners, but his technique was textbook rather than adaptive. Chen followed protocols precisely, but without the intuitive understanding that separated good soldiers from great ones. Sarah moved through the building behind them, watching as they cleared rooms with adequate but uninspired efficiency. She could see at least 3 moments where different tactics would have been faster, safer, more effective, but she held her tongue, maintained her position, and played the role of the protected team member. They completed the exercise with a respectable time and no casualties. As they emerged from the building, Rodriguez was grinning with satisfaction. "Not bad for a first run," he said, looking at Sarah. "You did good staying out of trouble." Sarah smiled back, but she was looking at General Thompson on the observation platform. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not disappointment, exactly, but something that might have been recognition. The second team entered the building, and Sarah watched them run the same exercise. Their approach was more aggressive, their tactics more innovative. They completed the course 30 seconds faster than Sarah's team. "Solid work," the instructor called out to both teams. "Take a break, then we'll run individual assessments." As the candidates gathered around water bottles and energy bars, Sarah noticed General Thompson approaching their group. Rodriguez immediately straightened, his chest puffing out with pride. "Sergeant Rodriguez," the general said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to shout to be heard. "Tell me about your team's performance." "Sir, we executed the mission according to standard operating procedures. Clean breach, systematic clearance, no casualties. Lieutenant Mitchell performed admirably in her support role." General Thompson's eyes shifted to Sarah, and she felt herself being evaluated in a way that was different from anything she had experienced in 6 months of training. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, "what did you observe during the exercise?" Sarah felt the familiar impulse to defer, to give the safe answer that wouldn't challenge her teammates or threaten the group dynamic. But something in General Thompson's gaze suggested he was looking for something more. "The exercise went well, sir," she said carefully. "The team worked effectively together." "I see," General Thompson replied, but his tone suggested he had heard something in her response that others had missed. "And if you were running the exercise again, would you change anything?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah was aware that Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen were watching her, waiting to see if she would step outside the role they had assigned her. For 6 months she had been giving safe answers, deferring to male authority, playing the part of the grateful female soldier who was happy to be included. But General Thompson wasn't asking for a safe answer. He was asking for a professional assessment from a trained Special Forces officer. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Yes, sir, she said, her voice steady and clear. I would change several things. The silence that followed Sarah's response was immediate and complete. Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. In 6 months of training together, Sarah had never contradicted their tactical decisions or suggested alternatives to their approaches. General Thompson's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed he had shifted his stance slightly, focusing his attention entirely on her. "Continue, Lieutenant," he said. Sarah took a breath, knowing that the next words would shatter the carefully constructed image she had maintained for 6 months. But something in General Thompson's presence demanded honesty rather than diplomacy. "The initial breach was adequate, sir, but predictable. We approached from the primary entrance, which any competent enemy would have covered. A simultaneous breach from the side window would have created confusion and divided their response." Rodriguez's eyes widened. Sarah was describing tactics that were more advanced than anything they had discussed in training. "The room clearance was systematic," Sarah continued, "but it gave the enemy too much time to establish defensive positions. A more aggressive approach using suppressive fire and maneuver would have been faster and safer." "And the team formation?" General Thompson asked. Sarah hesitated for a moment, aware that her next words would directly challenge the protective stance her teammates had adopted toward her. "The formation was designed to protect the least capable team member, sir, but it sacrificed tactical flexibility and overall effectiveness. A more aggressive formation would have utilized all team members as combat assets rather than limiting one to a support role." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Rodriguez's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. Williams looked confused, as if he was trying to reconcile the Sarah he knew with the person speaking with such tactical sophistication. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Rodriguez said tightly, "I think you might be—" "Sergeant Rodriguez," General Thompson interrupted, his voice carrying enough authority to stop Rodriguez mid-sentence. "I'm interested in hearing Lieutenant Mitchell's assessment." Sarah felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in 6 months. The feeling of being taken seriously as a military professional rather than being patronized as a female soldier who needed protection. "Sir," she continued, "the exercise revealed several opportunities for improvement. The team's communication was good, but it relied too heavily on verbal commands when hand signals would have been more secure. The weapons handling was competent, but there were moments when better positioning would have provided superior fields of fire." As Sarah spoke, she noticed General Thompson's expression changing. The neutral evaluation was being replaced by something that might have been interest, or perhaps recognition. "You observed all of this while participating in the exercise?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Situational awareness is a fundamental requirement for Special Forces operations. Every team member should be conducting continuous tactical assessment." The statement was delivered with such matter-of-fact professionalism that Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen found themselves nodding in agreement, even as they struggled to understand how Sarah had developed such sophisticated tactical knowledge. "Lieutenant Mitchell," General Thompson said, "I'd like to see you run the same exercise again. This time, I want you to lead the team." The request hit the group like a physical blow. Sarah lead the team? The idea was so outside their normal dynamic that none of them knew how to respond. "Sir," Rodriguez said carefully, "I think there might be some misunderstanding. Lieutenant Mitchell is very capable, but she's not really a combat leader. She's more of a support—" "Sergeant Rodriguez," General Thompson interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that suggested the conversation was not open for debate. "I want to see Lieutenant Mitchell lead this exercise. The rest of you will follow her orders." Sarah felt 6 months of carefully constructed facades crumbling around her. There was no way to lead the exercise effectively while maintaining the pleasant, non-threatening persona she had cultivated. Leadership required authority, confidence, and the willingness to make hard decisions. "Lieutenant Mitchell," General Thompson said, looking directly at her, "are you prepared to lead this team?" Sarah looked at her teammates, Rodriguez with his wounded pride, Williams with his confusion, Chen with his methodical uncertainty. For 6 months she had protected their egos by hiding her capabilities. Now she was being asked to shatter their perceptions completely. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice carrying a tone of command that none of them had heard before. "I'm ready." As Sarah's team prepared for their second run through the combat simulation, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen moved through their equipment checks with mechanical precision, but their glances toward Sarah revealed confusion and uncertainty. "All right, listen up," Sarah said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from nowhere. "We're changing the entire approach." For 6 months, Sarah had spoken to these men with deference and gratitude. Now she was giving orders with the confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed. "Rodriguez, you're taking the side window entry. Williams, you're coming with me through the main door, but we're going in fast and hard, no hesitation. Chen, you're providing overwatch from the exterior until we signal for your entry." Rodriguez started to object. "Sarah, I don't think—" "Lieutenant Mitchell," Sarah corrected, her voice sharp enough to cut through his protest. "And this isn't a discussion, Sergeant. These are your orders."
The transformation was so complete that all three men found themselves staring at her as if she had become a different person. Gone was the pleasant, deferential woman who had been their teammate. In her place was a military officer who clearly expected her commands to be followed. "Sir," Chen said carefully, "we haven't practiced this formation. It seems more aggressive than our usual approach." "Corporal Chen," Sarah replied, "Special Forces operations don't follow usual approaches. We adapt to achieve objectives with maximum efficiency and minimum risk. The formation I've described will accomplish both." General Thompson watched the exchange from the observation platform, his expression unreadable. Sarah was aware of his presence, but she was focused entirely on the mission at hand. "Questions?" she asked her team. Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen exchanged glances, but none of them spoke. They were dealing with a version of Sarah they had never encountered, and they didn't know how to respond. "Then let's move," Sarah commanded. The second assault on the building was unlike anything the training facility had seen from their group. Sarah led the main breach with a ferocity that was both calculated and devastating. Her movements were precise, economical, and absolutely lethal. She moved through the building like water flowing around obstacles, finding the most efficient path to each objective. Rodriguez, entering from the side window, found himself struggling to keep up with the pace Sarah was setting. Williams, who had been protective of Sarah for 6 months, was now following her lead as she demonstrated tactical skills that exceeded his own. The enemy forces in the simulation were overwhelmed. Sarah's approach was so aggressive and well coordinated that they couldn't establish defensive positions. She seemed to anticipate their responses, countering their moves before they could fully develop. "Contact left," Rodriguez called out as simulated enemies appeared in a side corridor. "Suppressing fire, then bound forward," Sarah ordered, her voice calm and clear despite the chaos around them. "Williams, take the right flank. Rodriguez, maintain pressure from your position." The engagement was over in seconds. Sarah's tactical decisions were so sound that the enemy forces found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned at every turn. When the exercise ended, the training facility was silent except for the sound of Sarah's team breathing heavily from the exertion. They had completed the course in 2/3 of the time their previous run had taken, with textbook tactical execution. As they emerged from the building, Rodriguez was shaking his head in disbelief. "What the hell was that?" he asked. "That," Sarah replied, "was how the exercise should have been run the first time." General Thompson was waiting for them as they cleared the building. His expression was no longer neutral. There was something in his eyes that might have been recognition or perhaps respect. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, "where did you learn to run tactical operations like that?" Sarah straightened, her bearing now completely military rather than the softer posture she had maintained for 6 months. "West Point, sir. First in my class. Advanced tactical training at Fort Benning. Airborne school. Ranger school." Rodriguez's mouth fell open. "You went to Ranger school." "Top of my class, Sergeant," Sarah replied matter-of-factly, "along with advanced marksmanship training, close quarters combat instruction, and specialized assault tactics." Williams was staring at her as if she had transformed into a different species. "But you never said anything. You always acted like I needed your protection," Sarah finished. "Like I was grateful for your guidance. Like I was just happy to be included." The three men nodded, unable to articulate their confusion. "I acted that way," Sarah said, "because I learned that excellence threatens male egos. Outstanding performance creates resentment. Being the best at something makes you less effective as a team member if your teammates feel diminished by your success." General Thompson was listening to every word, his expression growing more thoughtful with each statement. "So I made a choice," Sarah continued. "I chose to be accepted rather than respected. I chose to be liked rather than feared. I chose to hide my capabilities rather than threaten your sense of superiority." The words hit Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen like physical blows. They were forced to confront the reality that they had been protecting someone who was more skilled than they were, that their patronizing attitude had been directed toward a soldier who could outperform them in every category. "But today," Sarah said, looking directly at General Thompson, "I was asked to lead, and leadership requires truth, even when truth is uncomfortable."
The final phase of General Thompson's evaluation was conducted in a conference room rather than on the training grounds. The 12 candidates sat around a polished table, their weapons and tactical gear replaced by notepads and water bottles. "Leadership assessment," General Thompson announced, "will be conducted through scenario-based problem solving. You'll be presented with tactical situations and asked to develop solutions under time pressure." Sarah sat at the table with her familiar pleasant expression, but something fundamental had changed. Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen kept glancing at her, as if they were still trying to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the tactical expert they had witnessed. "First scenario," General Thompson continued. "Your team is tasked with extracting a high-value asset from a fortified compound. Intelligence indicates heavy resistance, limited extraction time, and civilian presence complicating the operational environment. The candidates were given 15 minutes to develop their approaches. Sarah watched as her former teammates worked through the problem, their solutions competent but conventional. When time was called, General Thompson asked each candidate to present their approach. Rodriguez outlined a systematic assault plan that was thorough but time-consuming. Williams proposed a stealth infiltration that was cautious but potentially ineffective against heavy resistance. Chen developed a detailed logistics plan that was comprehensive but inflexible. Lieutenant Mitchell, General Thompson said, "Your approach." Sarah stood, her bearing now completely different from the deferential posture she had maintained for 6 months. "Sir, I recommend a 3-phase operation combining deception, overwhelming force, and rapid extraction." She moved to the whiteboard and began sketching a tactical diagram with the confidence of someone who had done this type of planning countless times. Phase 1. Create a diversion at the compound's primary entrance using simulated vehicle assault to draw defensive attention. Phase 2. Simultaneous breach from 3 separate points while enemy forces are focused on the diversion. Phase 3. Rapid extraction using predetermined routes with contingency plans for compromised extraction points. General Thompson studied the diagram, his expression thoughtful. Time estimate: 12 minutes from initiation to extraction, sir. The key is overwhelming the enemy's ability to respond coherently, rather than giving them time to organize resistance. Rodriguez was staring at the tactical diagram as if it was written in a foreign language. The plan was more sophisticated than anything he had seen in his 3 deployments. "And civilian protection?" General Thompson asked. "The diversionary assault is designed to draw enemy forces away from civilian areas. The multi-point breach prevents the enemy from using civilians as shields. The rapid extraction timeline minimizes exposure to civilian casualties." General Thompson nodded slowly. "Continue with Scenario 2. The second scenario was even more complex, a hostage rescue in an urban environment with multiple buildings, unknown enemy strength and political complications. Sarah's solution was brilliant, a coordinated operation that used the urban environment to advantage while minimizing collateral damage. By the third scenario, the other candidates had stopped trying to compete with Sarah's presentations. Her tactical knowledge was clearly superior to anything they could produce. "Lieutenant Mitchell," General Thompson said after the final scenario, "your solutions demonstrate exceptional tactical understanding. Where did you develop this level of expertise?" Sarah's answer was delivered with the matter-of-fact professionalism that had replaced her earlier deference. "Sir, I've been studying advanced tactical operations since my first year at West Point. I've read every major work on small unit tactics, urban warfare, and special operations. I've analyzed historical operations, studied contemporary conflicts, and developed theoretical approaches to complex tactical problems. And you've been doing this throughout your time in this training program?" "Yes, sir. I've been continuing my education while participating in the program." General Thompson looked around the table at the other candidates. "And none of you were aware of Lieutenant Mitchell's background or capabilities?" Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, Lieutenant Mitchell never mentioned her academic achievements or tactical knowledge. She always seemed, she presented herself as someone who needed your protection rather than someone who might be more qualified than you were." The question hung in the air like an indictment. Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen were forced to confront the reality that their assumptions about Sarah had been based on gender stereotypes rather than actual assessment of her capabilities. "Sir," Williams said slowly, "she never acted like she was better than us. She always seemed grateful for our guidance. And did it occur to any of you to ask about her qualifications, to evaluate her capabilities objectively, to consider that she might have valuable contributions to make to your team's effectiveness?" The 3 men looked at each other, unable to answer. They had made assumptions based on gender, and had never questioned those assumptions, even when presented with evidence of Sarah's competence. General Thompson turned back to Sarah. "Lieutenant Mitchell, why did you choose to hide your capabilities from your teammates?" Sarah's response was measured and thoughtful. "Sir, I learned early in my military career that exceptional performance by female soldiers can create resentment and isolation. Male soldiers often feel threatened by women who outperform them, which can compromise team cohesion and effectiveness. So you chose to underperform. I chose to be accepted, sir. I believed that being part of a team, even in a diminished role, was more valuable than being isolated as an outstanding individual." General Thompson nodded slowly. "And now?" Sarah looked around the table at her teammates, then back at General Thompson. "Now I realize that hiding my capabilities didn't serve anyone well. It prevented me from contributing fully to the team's success, and it deprived my teammates of the opportunity to learn from someone with different expertise. And it deprived the Army of the full benefit of your talents," General Thompson added. "Yes, sir." The final debriefing took place in General Thompson's temporary office, a sparse room with military efficiency written into every detail. Sarah sat across from him, her posture now completely military rather than the softer bearing she had maintained for 6 months. "Lieutenant Mitchell," General Thompson began, "I've reviewed your complete file. West Point, first in your class. Ranger School, distinguished graduate, advanced tactical training, expert ratings in all categories. Your performance today was consistent with your record." Sarah nodded but said nothing. "The question is why you chose to hide these qualifications from your teammates and instructors." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Sir, I've learned that excellence can be a liability for women in the military. Male soldiers often interpret superior performance by female soldiers as a threat to their masculinity rather than an asset to their team, and you believe that deception was preferable to confrontation. I believe that acceptance was preferable to isolation, sir. I thought that being part of a team, even in a diminished role, was more valuable than being excluded from the team entirely." General Thompson leaned back in his chair. "Lieutenant Mitchell, do you know why I'm here?" "To evaluate candidates for advanced placement, sir. More specifically, I'm here to identify soldiers who have the potential to lead the most elite units in the American military. I'm looking for individuals who can make the hard decisions, who can perform under pressure, and who can inspire others to exceed their own limitations." Sarah remained silent, sensing that General Thompson was building towards something important. "What I observed today was a soldier who possesses all of those qualities, but who has been hiding them in order to make others feel comfortable. That's not leadership, Lieutenant. That's accommodation." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent 6 months believing that she was being strategic, that her approach was serving the greater good. General Thompson was telling her that she had been failing in her fundamental duty as a military officer. "Sir," she said carefully, "I was trying to be effective within the constraints of the situation. Lieutenant Mitchell, effective leaders don't accept constraints that prevent them from serving their mission. They change the constraints." General Thompson pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk between them. "I'm recommending you for immediate advancement to Delta Force selection. You'll be one of the first female soldiers to attempt the program." Sarah felt her heart stop. Delta Force was the most elite unit in the American military, the absolute pinnacle of special operations. The selection process was legendary for its difficulty, and the failure rate was over 90%. "Sir, I'm honored by the recommendation, but I'm not sure I'm ready for." "Lieutenant Mitchell," General Thompson interrupted, "for the past 6 months you've been hiding capabilities that exceed those of most soldiers in conventional special forces. You've been operating at perhaps 30% of your potential in order to avoid threatening your male colleagues' egos." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Delta Force doesn't have time for that kind of accommodation. We need soldiers who can perform at 100% of their capabilities, regardless of whether it makes others uncomfortable." Sarah stared at the folder, understanding that it represented everything she had been trained for, everything she had dreamed of achieving, but it also represented a complete abandonment of the survival strategy she had developed over 6 months. "What about team cohesion?" she asked. "What about acceptance?" "Lieutenant Mitchell, real team cohesion is built on mutual respect for each other's capabilities, not on false accommodations. Real acceptance comes from proving your worth through performance, not from hiding your talents to avoid confrontation. You have a choice to make, Lieutenant. You can continue to hide your capabilities in order to maintain comfortable relationships with soldiers who may be threatened by your success, or you can accept the challenge of performing at your full potential and inspiring others to do the same." He handed her the folder. "Delta Force selection begins in 3 weeks. If you choose to accept the challenge, you'll be competing against the best soldiers in the American military. None of them will be holding back to protect your feelings, and I expect you to extend them the same courtesy." Sarah took the folder, feeling its weight both physically and symbolically. "Sir, what about Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen? What happens to them?" "They'll continue their current training program. They're competent soldiers who will serve effectively in conventional special forces units, but they're not Delta Force material, and they never will be." The distinction was clear. Sarah was being offered an opportunity that was beyond anything her teammates would ever achieve. The question was whether she was willing to accept it. "Sir," she said, "I need to know. Was I wrong to hide my capabilities? Was I wrong to try to fit in rather than stand out?" General Thompson's expression softened slightly. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you made the best decision you could with the information you had, but now you have better information. You've seen that hiding your talents serves no one well. You've learned that real leadership requires courage to be excellent, even when excellence is uncomfortable for others." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The military needs soldiers who can perform at their absolute best when lives are on the line. It doesn't need soldiers who handicap themselves to protect other people's feelings." As General Thompson left the office, Sarah sat alone with the Delta Force recommendation folder. Inside was an application that would change her life completely, that would force her to abandon the accommodating persona she had cultivated and demand that she perform at her absolute peak. For the first time in 6 months,
Sarah Mitchell allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to be truly excellent, to perform without limitations, to lead without apology. The nice girl was gone. The warrior was ready to emerge. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood at the entrance to the Delta Force selection facility at Fort Bragg. The accommodating smile was gone, replaced by the focused intensity of someone who had decided to stop hiding her capabilities. Rodriguez, Williams and Chen had completed their original training program and been assigned to conventional Special Forces units. They were competent soldiers who would serve effectively in their assigned roles, but they would never know what they might have achieved if they had pushed themselves to their absolute limits. Sarah had made a different choice. She had chosen to be excellent rather than acceptable, to be respected rather than liked, to be feared rather than protected. The Delta Force selection process was brutal, designed to identify the 1% of soldiers who could perform at superhuman levels under impossible conditions. Sarah was one of 12 women attempting the program, and she knew that every male candidate would be watching to see if she was truly qualified or just benefiting from political correctness. She was ready for their scrutiny. After 6 months of hiding her capabilities, she was eager to show exactly what she could do when operating at full capacity. The first phase of selection was a physical fitness test that eliminated 40% of the candidates. Sarah finished in the top 10%. Her performance so strong that it forced the remaining candidates to reevaluate their assumptions about female soldiers. The second phase was advanced tactical training, where candidates were required to master complex military skills under extreme time pressure. Sarah's West Point education and Ranger School training gave her advantages that became apparent immediately, but it was the third phase, leadership assessment, where Sarah truly distinguished herself. When placed in charge of mixed-gender teams, she demonstrated the kind of natural authority that couldn't be taught or faked. Male soldiers who had initially questioned her presence found themselves following her orders without hesitation. "Mitchell," said Colonel James Harrison, the Delta Force commander, after Sarah had successfully completed a particularly challenging exercise, "I've been watching your performance throughout selection. You're not just meeting standards, you're exceeding them." Sarah stood at attention, her bearing completely military. "Thank you, sir. Where did you develop this level of tactical expertise?" "West Point, sir. Ranger School, and 6 months of studying my teammates' weaknesses while pretending to be less capable than I actually was." Colonel Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Explain." Sarah told him the story of her time in conventional Special Forces training, her decision to hide her capabilities, and General Thompson's intervention. Colonel Harrison listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. "So for 6 months, you operated at a fraction of your potential in order to avoid threatening your male teammates?" "Yes, sir. I believe that team acceptance was more important than individual excellence. And now I understand that excellence serves the team better than accommodation, that real leadership requires the courage to be better than others, even when that makes them uncomfortable." Colonel Harrison nodded slowly. "Mitchell, you're going to complete Delta Force selection. You're going to be one of the first female operators in the unit's history. But more importantly, you're going to prove that the military is stronger when every soldier performs at their absolute best, regardless of gender." Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 months, the satisfaction of being recognized for her actual capabilities rather than being praised for her accommodating attitude. "Sir," she said, "I won't disappoint you." "Mitchell," Colonel Harrison replied, "I don't think you could if you tried." 5 years later, Major Sarah Mitchell stood before a group of female military academy cadets at West Point, her Delta Force tab gleaming on her uniform alongside ribbons that told the story of exceptional service in the world's most elite military unit. "Ladies," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through performance rather than accommodation, "I'm here to tell you about the most dangerous enemy you'll face in your military careers." The cadets leaned forward, expecting to hear about foreign adversaries or battlefield threats. "The most dangerous enemy," Sarah continued, "is the temptation to make yourself smaller in order to make others comfortable, the temptation to hide your capabilities so that male soldiers don't feel threatened, the temptation to be liked rather than respected." She paused, looking at the young faces before her. "For 6 months I operated at 30% of my potential because I believed that accommodation was more important than excellence. I nearly destroyed my career trying to protect male egos rather than serving my mission." A cadet in the front row raised her hand. "Ma'am, but what if being excellent creates resentment? What if male soldiers refuse to work with us?" Sarah smiled, remembering asking similar questions years earlier. "Cadet, soldiers who are threatened by your excellence are not soldiers you want to depend on in combat. Real warriors respect competence, regardless of its source. They want the best soldiers on their team because their lives depend on it." She gestured to her uniform, to the tabs and ribbons that represented years of exceptional service. "This uniform represents 5 years of operating at my full potential, 5 years of refusing to apologize for being better than some of my male colleagues, 5 years of proving that the military is stronger when every soldier performs at their absolute best. Another cadet spoke up. "Ma'am, were you ever afraid that you wouldn't be accepted?" "I was terrified," Sarah admitted. "But I learned that acceptance earned through deception is worthless. The soldiers who respect me now do so because they've seen what I can do when I'm not holding back. They trust me to lead them because they know I'll never ask them to do something I can't do myself." Sarah moved closer to the cadets, her voice becoming more personal. "When I was hiding my capabilities, I was serving my ego rather than my mission. I was more concerned with being liked than with being effective. That's not leadership, that's cowardice." She pointed to her Delta Force tab. "This represents the decision to be excellent rather than acceptable, to be feared rather than protected, to earn respect through performance rather than accommodation." A cadet asked, "Ma'am, what happened to the male soldiers who protected you during training?" Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "Rodriguez, Williams and Chen are good soldiers serving effectively in conventional special forces, but they never pushed themselves to their absolute limits because they were comfortable with the status quo. They never learned what they might have achieved if they had been challenged by someone performing at full capacity." She paused, considering the broader implications. "I realize now that by hiding my capabilities, I didn't just handicap myself, I handicapped them. I deprived them of the opportunity to be pushed to excellence by working alongside someone who was performing at a higher level." The room was silent as the cadets processed this revelation. "Ladies," Sarah concluded, "you will graduate from West Point with the finest military education in the world. You will be trained to lead soldiers in the most challenging environments on Earth. But all of that training will be worthless if you choose to hide your capabilities to protect male egos." She straightened, her bearing reflecting years of commanding respect through excellence. "Be excellent. Be uncompromising. Be the warrior you were trained to be. The military needs your absolute best, not your most accommodating." As the cadets filed out of the auditorium, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared lieutenant who had hidden her capabilities seemed like a different person, someone who had been willing to accept mediocrity in exchange for acceptance. The woman who stood in that auditorium was someone who had learned that true strength comes not from making others comfortable, but from pushing everyone, including herself, to achieve their absolute best. Her phone buzzed with a text from General Thompson, now retired but still mentoring promising officers. "Saw your speech online. Proud of the warrior you've become. The military is stronger because you chose excellence over accommodation." Sarah smiled, remembering the conversation that had changed her life. General Thompson had seen through her facade and challenged her to become who she was meant to be. Now she was doing the same for the next generation of female military leaders. Outside the auditorium, she encountered Colonel Harrison, her former Delta Force commander, now serving as a Pentagon staff officer. "Sarah," he said, "how do you think they received the message?" "Some of them understood immediately," she replied. "Others are still processing. But they all heard the same thing I needed to hear 5 years ago, that hiding your capabilities serves no one well." Colonel Harrison nodded. "The military has changed because of soldiers like you. Female officers who refused to accept limitations, who demanded to be judged by their performance rather than their gender." Sarah looked back at the auditorium where the next generation of female military leaders was beginning their journey. "Sir, I just told them what I wish someone had told me earlier, that excellence is not negotiable, that leadership requires courage, and that the military needs their absolute best, and that accommodation is not service," Colonel Harrison added. "Exactly, sir, that accommodation is not service." As Sarah walked across the West Point campus where her military career had begun, she reflected on the price of excellence. She had lost the comfortable acceptance that came from being non-threatening. She had gained the respect that came from being undeniably competent. The choice, she realized, had been between being liked and being effective, between being comfortable and being excellent, between serving her ego and serving her mission. She had chosen excellence, and the military was stronger because of it. The female soldier who had once hidden her capabilities to protect male egos had become a leader who demanded excellence from everyone around her. She had learned that true equality came not from being treated gently, but from being held to the same impossible standards as everyone else. And in meeting those standards, she had proven that the future of the military belonged to those who refused to accept limitations, regardless of their gender. The warrior had finally come home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.